Chapter 701, export 2D CAD as image. So we've created our 3D model. Okay, this is a 3D model. And we can then use this to generate 2D images, whether they are flat-on images using the camera set to parallel, possibly the elevation buttons. This is the views toolbar. So we could get a nice orthographic view of the various bits and pieces. Okay, the top view, front view, side views, etc. I'll just go back to my scene 1. So that would be really useful to generate the images into AutoCAD. Alternatively, we can render sort of a 3D type view as a flat 2D image. Okay, so if you're recognizing a slight huskiness in my voice at the moment, that's a little present from my returning students, but nonetheless, it should disappear in a few days. The other thing that's important is the way in which it handles profile lines. Now, in my styles, I've currently got the shaded style. So if I go into edit, you'll see there's no profiles set. Okay, just go back to select. I've also got one here called hidden line no cut. So it's not going to use the cut option, but when I choose it, it sets it to hidden line mode. But what it also does is adds profiles, because if I go to the edit, I've got the profile set to 2. So that's an option when you export in AutoCAD. And I'll show you what happens later on when we open up these files into AutoCAD. But for now, choose which sort of style you want, and then File, Export, and 2D Graphic. So important, it's not the 3D model, it's a 2D graphic. Click on 2D Graphic. I'm now in my Chapter 7 folder in the AutoCAD files. I'm going to save it as type DWG. Okay, so that's important. You get all these different file types to save, but make sure it's DWG, or if you haven't got access to AutoCAD, DXF will open up in many vector file formats, including Illustrator, for example. And then let's click on Options. Okay, so choose Options. So in the Options dialog box, we've got this file format. So it defaults, I think, to Release 14, but you can choose any of the versions up to 2013. The height is not really important for this one, but you probably want it as big as possible. But as they're vector lines, it doesn't really make a difference. And also, as it's not an orthographic view, then again, it doesn't really make much difference. The profile lines, however, so this is going to pick up any profile lines. And if we have profile lines, which we have got, we either choose none, we don't want any profile lines picked up, or we can choose a polyline with a width. And notice the width here and the automatic set to 33mm. That's really thick, so I'd probably take it down to about 10 maximum. That's still going to be quite thick, and we'll see later. And then we can also separate them out on a layer. So these are quite useful little features. Similarly with section lines, we haven't got any section lines at the moment, so none is going to be fine. I don't show extension lines, I don't like them, but these are the settings that you can play with. Okay, say OK, and then I'm just going to save it sort of out here, then click on Export, and then we get our AutoCAD export audit OK, and then we can say OK to that. Okay, so you can try this out with different styles. So it doesn't pick up any of the render, any of the colors, none of that. It's just to do with the lines. Okay, so very, very useful sort of feature. So once you've got a few of these sort of 3D views you can put into your AutoCAD file, it might be able to explain some of the trickier things to a client. We'll also be looking at this in layouts, and we'll also be adding materials later as well. So we'll get a slightly better view. But as far as the export to AutoCAD goes, it's just the vector lines that go across, nothing else. Chapter 702, create group from slice option. You might or might not be aware that there is a facility to create a group from a slice. A slice is the section cut. Okay, now there is already a section cut in this model. However, the style is not set to show it at the moment. Okay, I've got this style here, shaded with textures no cut. And that's because none of these things are toggled. If I went to scene 2, we can see the section cut. Okay, now I haven't decided to show this section fill, which is this one. But if you wanted to show the section fill, Then handy for sort of 1 to 100, 1 to 50 sections where you just really want to see the basic sort of information of the wall thickness. But when it comes to a detail, maybe we can do a better job in layout. So I've just turned that off. That's the reason why that's not toggled on. Scene 3 is an orthographic section. Okay, so this is showing a section cut through the window and the door. So because we've cut through the window frame at the top, and then we can see that window frame elevation. So when we use the section option, we've got to be careful that we want to pick up the information behind as well. So there's a playoff between the section information and the elevation information. Okay, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. But this one has basically got the front elevation turned on, and the camera is set to parallel. So those are things you do in the model. And then the shaded cut style, which is just showing the shaded cut. Scene 4 is going to give us the plane. Okay, so scene 4 gives us the plane because this icon here, display section planes, is toggled on. And I've created the style, which is shaded and section plane. So I get to see that. So with this section plane, you've got to be a little bit careful. Now, it's been covered previously, but just a recap. If I right click and sort of click on active plane, so it's no longer the active plane, it's just gray, then it doesn't do any cutting, regardless of what's happening up here. Okay, so it does have to be the active cut. Now, I can just double click it, and that will turn it into the active cut. Click away, so then you can see that the orange outline is the active cut. So that's one thing to bear in mind. There's some new features with these. It gives us the section number. So it's section 11. That's quite useful as well. This thing can be moved. So I can use the move tool to move this up and back through it. So I can pick where I want my section cut. So again, very useful. I can put different sections in, but I have to make them the active cut. And even though there are ways to make more than one section active at the same time by putting it inside groups, usually you only tend to have one active section in a scene. The other things to point out are that if I right click on my section plane, then I can create a group from slice. So if I click on this, and you notice then it puts a blue line around the group. I'm going to use the move tool. I'll just move this out of the way so we get a chance to see it. And just make sure you don't bring it forward of the section plane. So you get, so it disappears. If it's in front of the section plane, then you won't see it. And I'll just turn off the section plane for a second so we can see what's going on. Now, the good thing about using this group from slice feature is that the objects, if I'm just going to double click on that, then these are still retaining their polyline sort of state, okay? Depending on where that section cut is, but really useful when you're using the features in layout to fill. Okay, now this one's not cut through there, so it won't fill. I'd have to join these things up. And also, it doesn't show lines in elevation. That's the other thing. But we do get, quite a detailed sort of view of what's going on. Now, the only reason we get this detailed view is because the profiles themselves were detailed to start off with. Obviously, it's not going to give us any information that it doesn't have. So that's the upside. It retains its sort of consistency. The downside is we don't see information in the background. So the frame thickness in elevation we don't see. So to do that, if I go back to my scene 3, and I wanted to pick up this sort of frame in elevation, we don't have the frame in elevation at the lower level, but we've also got sort of the information relating to the holders and the bar of the mesh. Then what I would have to do is go to File, Export, and then 2D Graphic, and export that as an AutoCAD file. Okay, so if I want the lines to pick up the section cut and the lines in elevation, then it's a 2D graphic export. If I just want to pick up the section information, then I can use that. Okay, and I could then go to File, Export, Section Slice, go into my Chapter 7 folder, and I just renamed this Chapter 702 Export Section Slice. And then under my options, again, I've got some information. So what do I want? True section orthographic, which is really what I want, release 14 or up to 2013. Or we can have the what you see is what you get, screen projection, full size, that's pretty important. And then the section lines. What type of state do you want the section lines come out as? And none is probably a sensible choice. All right, and also good to separate these things on layer if you did decide you wanted polylines. And then we say OK and export, and then we get the AutoCAD export audit OK, and then we say OK. So now we've created a section slice, not a 2D view. Okay, so in the next chapter, we'll look at the various options inside of AutoCAD. I've created a few more versions of these, but hopefully you get the picture, how to sort of export and use your created geometry, your 3D geometry for other programs. Chapter 703, we're looking now at the files that we generated from SketchUp into DWG files. So we've got Chapter 703, export 2D CAD as image, and that's this one here. Then we've got export CAD with profile, so that gives us thicker profile edges. Section slice gives us this one, and then the section elevation, we also had a profile thickness for the section lines and the profile lines on this one. So that gives us an interesting looking thing as well. So let's run through some of the options that we've got. Back to CAD as an image. I'll zoom in and we can see basically what's going on with this. Every single line is a separate line. Okay, that's the first thing to bear in mind. So lots and lots of little lines. Also, when you come to circles or corners, it's going to generate an awful lot of lines as well. Okay, so nothing comes in as a group. Same thing for the polylines, to be perfectly honest. So you do end up with just an awful lot of lines. That said, if you wanted to generate, say, 2D sort of vector file that looked like a 3D image, then that's absolutely perfect. So if I just go and flick round to the front view, we can see they are perfectly flat. I'll select it all. Look at my properties and on my geometry, and Z has a height of 0, so everything is perfectly flat. So that's another thing to bear in mind. Let's look at the profiles. So let's zoom in on these. So some lines, which are the leading edges of everything, these do then have an extra thickness. Okay, so if we look at the thickness of these lines, I'll just turn that section cut on, but doesn't affect anything in this. So we do get extra thickness, but even though they are profiles, they are still single lines. Okay, so nothing joins. Anything I could do possibly, and it makes a mess of the corners as well, is double click on a polyline, and then I could join it with other ones. But unless they're nicely connected on the corners, you're going to struggle to get anything decent out of it. You could control the thickness if you wanted to. Again, probably the easiest way to do that, if you want to do a global change, would be to select everything, and then up on the properties, choose from all, just polylines, and then you could set the global width to something else, and then that would give you sort of a thinner sort of finish to it all. The section slice, we're getting the hang of this now, is just basically that section cut. Okay, so whatever we had in the model, and whatever that section cut touched, then is going to generate the 2D stuff. So again, you zoom in closely to this, you see there's all sorts of little sort of inconsistencies with it. This thing should have moved up, but once again, nothing is connected. Okay, so useful for maybe tracing over or using as a very generic type of thing, but for an accurate sort of CAD 2D drawing, not necessarily what you want. The benefit of a 3D is to be able to explain to a layperson something that is not necessarily understood by looking at something that just frightens people because it looks a bit technical. What's going on here? Who knows? So this one here, the 2D CAD section elevation, this is going to give us the elevation stuff as well as the section information. And once again, we've got thick polylines, so we can't really see what's going on. I'm just going to grab everything and go back to my properties and choose my polylines, set a global width to 0, and then that should give us slightly better information. Okay, so now we've got the circles, We've got dotted lines for the hidden line. But this circle has got, again, lots and lots and lots of segments that make it up. Okay, so just be aware of what's going on. What I would probably suggest you do is bring them in as blocks. So you can bring a drawing in as a block. It's no problem. You just go to the insert and then click on sort of insert, and then you find the block and then you bring it in, and it comes in all connected together. And that might be a safer way of bringing it in. Other things that you can do with these is if there's any lines that are overlapping or they are doubled up, which sometimes happens, then you can use the overkill command. So that's if you type in OVER, then overkill. So we can choose that. If I select all of these objects and then hit enter, then I just accept all the default settings. I'm not going to go through these, but it'll tell us then that 19 duplicates were deleted, 97 overlapping objects were deleted as well. So, you can clean it up a little bit, but this is not meant to be chapter and verse on how to deal with CAD files. This is just to show you what you can get from SketchUp and how it works in AutoCAD. Okay, so we'll move on now to bring in some 2D information into layout and then see what we can do with it from there. In this exercise, we are going to load up the pre-made template files that I have created. Now, you could cut and paste those files from the folder called Layout Templates into one of the two file paths that are set by default. On the Mac, they are quite well hidden. On Windows, they're not so difficult to find, but it's still quite a long-winded process. And what you'd probably have to do is copy and paste all new template folders into one of those file paths. It's probably a lot easier, especially if you're working on a network, to be able to map a new path and then put all your template files in there. So when you come to use them, standard templates for the office, then you can just find them in those folders. So the process is, if you're using a Mac, then go up to Layout and then click on that and go to Preferences. On a Windows machine, click on Edit and go down to Preferences. So under Layout Preferences, you've got all sorts of options. Now, we've looked at these in the original SketchUp series. So we're going to go to Folders, and under Template, we're going to click on the plus sign and we're going to browse for the folder in the exercise files. So here we are in the exercise files folder, and then if we click on Layout Templates and then click OK, and that puts a new path there, and then we can close this down, and now we've got our path mapped. So what we do then is go File and New, and under our Layout Templates, we've got these two new templates. These are the ones I'm going to use for this series. This is the previous one from the Layout series. So I'm going to use the A2 template. If you're using Imperial, then you might want to use the ANSI C. They're very similar in size. This is just proportions are slightly different. So I'll use A2 template and click Open. So now we've got a new drawing, so called Untitled, and we're on cover page, which is one of the pages. Plans and sections and details, these all appear when we click on the various different pages related to that document. Okay, so now we've loaded our templates, we can add some content to it. We shall do that in the next exercise. Chapter 705, Insert into Layout. So we've got this thing, which is our group from slice. So they're still in SketchUp, but we've got this. We've also got the SketchUp file, which is the 3D model with the section cut through it. So what I'm going to do is, with this selected, I'm going to copy this to the clipboard and then paste that in, see how that works. What we'll then do is insert this file and see what we can do with that. And then finally, in this exercise, we'll bring in the AutoCAD file and see how that works as well. So make sure you got this selected. Control C to copy to clipboard, and then go over to the Chapter 705 Insert into Layout file, which you'll find in the Chapter 7 Layout Files folder, and we'll paste it in. So here we are, the Chapter 705 Insert into Layout. I'm on Details. This is simply the page. Okay, so cover page, plans and sections and details. So it's not a different file to what you've got. It's just the page showing up on that. And I'm going to Control V, and this is going to paste this in to the drawing. Okay, so it's come in at a scale. Now, if we go to the SketchUp model drop down, we've got the current scale is 1 to 33.3. Okay, so that means this is still linked back to SketchUp. If we went to our references, we'd see a link to this in the references. If I wanted to do anything with the line work on this, I'm going to have to change from raster to vector. Ignore the warning because I know what's happening with complex styles, and then we can see that we've got line work, but we still can only edit the line work via the styles option. So line weight currently set to 0.5. If I set that to 0.2 and then hit enter, then the line work becomes slightly thinner, but it's still linked back to SketchUp. The only way I can deal with this is by right-clicking and exploding. Okay, so then it'll give me the scale of 1 to 33. The important thing is if I decided to go back to my view and change my scale to 1 to 20 in SketchUp, so now it's off this sort of grid. So just be careful you don't right-click and explode now, because the important thing is that if you right-click and explode, it's going to only give you what you can see. All right, so that's something that you need to bear in mind. So if you wanted this to be 1 to 20, then you make sure you drag out this window, because preserve scale on resize is checked. And then we should be able to see all of it. And when we can see all of it, we can then right-click and then we can explode, and then it'll give us our line work. Okay. Now, the problem with this line work is that even though we've taken it in from group to slice, and in SketchUp, if we start digging into it, we get the full sort of polyline. In this program, we just get the single lines. Okay, it doesn't join these lines up. The only way you can do that is by using the join tool, or in fact, just leaving them open. Okay, so that's the downside. Also, it picks up all the other sort of anomalies that we've seen already from the AutoCAD file. Okay, so now if we link the SketchUp file, so we click on Insert, we just go back into the SketchUp files, we insert into Layout, Chapter 705, and click Open. And we make sure we've got Scene 3, which is the current scene. Change the scale to 1 to 20. Drag this out. So we end up with pretty much the same thing. Okay, the only thing that we can do slightly differently in this one is by, if I double click inside the view, because it is still linked, then I've got access to kind of that 3D thing. Okay, but apart from that, it's a rasterized file unless I change it to vector, and then this will possibly cause a bit of an issue with complex styles, because we've got transparencies. So you might find that it's not quite what you intended. Okay, so linking in doesn't do any different than just cutting and pasting in. It does exactly the same thing. Okay, so I'll just select that and delete it. The only other option we've got to see whether that's going to give us any extra functionality is inserting the CAD file. So let's go back to File, Insert, and let's go into our AutoCAD files. And this one is the same as this one, Export Section Slice. And then we click Open. Model space only, because we don't want we didn't have a paper space layout anyway, and click on Import. And this comes in at a scale of 1 to 10. The useful thing is that it does have the scale. That is really, really useful. So I can right click on this scale, set this down back to 1 to 20. So now these are the same size. And again, if you want to use the imperial equivalent, then please do so. And we'll see what we've got with this one. And to be perfectly honest, if I can cut a long story short, they are pretty much the same. It doesn't give us any extra functionality. What it does do, however, is I right click and then group, and then we've got the single lines. Okay, if I click away, then it groups it in this scale. Then I can do some scaling with it, but nothing else. Okay, so I'll show you how you can sort of get around that and how we can modify sort of individual vector lines in the next lesson. But sadly, for all the effort that we've put in layout, if we want to create rectangles with fills, etc., then we pretty much have to draw them ourselves. Okay, that's the bottom line with this. That saying, we do have a very good start point. Okay, so let's not dismiss this as a complete and utter failure. It's very quick to trace around with Object Snap turned on. So in our next lesson, we'll look at how we can use line styles and fills to enhance what we currently have. Chapter 706, working with vector lines in layout. I'm just going to show you how we can sort of quickly enhance this by using the pencil tool or the lines tool and the rectangle tool and any other tool we want, maybe the circle tool, to fill in some of this stuff. And I explain why using this thing is not as easy as you might think. So I'm zooming in using my scale at the bottom so I can zoom in quickly to that area. So if I was to use the join tool, what actually happens with these lines is that this boundary, the one that surrounds this backfill, and this one here, which is one that surrounds the earth, they will have a separate line for each. Okay, now in this case, it doesn't really matter because they're both the same shape. But if we come to this bit along here, then there's a small line which is for this, there's another line which is for this, there's another line which is for this foundation. There's also on top of that, or underneath or in the middle, a line which is coming along this for this bit. So if I was to use the join tool and I was to pick up these individual segments and join them together, then the line for this bit would go, the line for this bit would go, and the line for this bit would go, and I'd just be left with one big line along there, which I then have to split with this. And whilst it's easy to join things and to split things, it is a bit of a pain trying to get these things in order. And I think probably the most efficient way that I've found to do these things is to just leave these lines as they are. And we'll either draw over them or under them. So depending on the object that we're trying to sort of highlight, whether it's something like a block or a foundation, which really should have a slightly thicker edge to it because these are in section and they are things that are supportive structural elements. This is also in section, but this is just a dividing line between one type of earthwork and the soil. Okay, so this would not necessarily have a very thick line. And when you start establishing this drawing sort of element hierarchy, where the structural elements are the most sort of important and they have the thickest lines, and then things that are in elevation or things like plasterboard or the insulation, they'll have a slightly thinner line, then you do get a better amount of definition with your drawings. It all stems back from using 2, 3, or 4 pens when you were drawing by hand to establish what was kind of more important than other things. And so we try to adapt that situation with these drawings. Using too many different line thicknesses can obviously cause confusion. So stick to 2 or 3 and you shouldn't be too far wrong. So what I start off with, I select this entire thing, and then for the stroke of this group, I will take it down to its sort of smallest 0.1. I could make it 0.05 or something, but 0.1 is fine. So what we can do now is with our rectangle tool, we can create some shapes, and I'm going to draw on the line work. I'm going to open up my shape style, this one here, and I've got a stroke, and I'll change the stroke to 1, and my fill, I'll expand the colors. I will have a sort of a gray fill for this. Okay, so slightly there. That'll do, 78%. I'll then grab this color and drop it into this box. So click in the corner and then drop down to this point. And just creating these boxes, which are representing our blocks. And we can still see the joint between them. That's not a problem. We can also put a pattern fill on, which I'll show you how to do later. So this is then determining this. I can also use the same thing for this bit down here, sitting over the top. Now, what I'm going to do next is go down to my fills layer and use my pencil tool, and I'll just preset my shape styles. So I'm turning the stroke off, and for my fill, if I had some sort of earth color, and then I can drag that into there. And then with this selected, just choose that color. So now I've got the fill set. With my pencil, I can just start tracing around these bits. So I'll click there to there, come across, up, follow this path using the object snap. Okay, so now I've got that
filled in like so. I can select it. It's easy. It's sitting underneath the line work, so I still see that edge, and all is good. If I'm not happy with the color, then I can change the color by using these sliders or by using this thing in the middle. Okay, I've got others. I've got the image. I've got the grays. I've got a list of colors. So you can choose the colors you want and start adding some definition. So that's how easy it is to create these shapes. Next up, we'll be looking at pattern fills. I'll have done a little bit more work to this, so then we can start adding sort of patterns to the various colors and to make it look even more interesting. Chapter 707, adding pattern fills and styling lines. It'll only be one line that we're styling, in fact. It'll be this red line, just to show you how easy it is to do that process. Pattern fills, again, not a difficult thing. We've got some various patterns to add. So this is earth, and this is going to be earth as well. This is going to be backfill, gravel. We've got concrete. We could use concrete for these blocks as well. What we really could do is put an extra line in and show concrete there, and then the sort of CMU, or we could use just a solid CMU type fill, concrete for that, sand or screed for that, a bit of sand there. This insulation one is a bit interesting. What I have done for that, we could use the rigid insulation fill, or you could use the squiggly line. Now, I've made a squiggly line, and it'll be in the scrapbook that we can use later on. But for now, we might just leave this blank. But you'll get the sense of how easy it is to add these pattern fills. And if you don't like the fact that these things are colored, you're a bit of a purist maybe, and you want just black and white, or you've been told to produce black and white images, then we can just get rid of the color. I shall show you all that in this exercise. So what we need is the pattern fill dialog box. We need our shape style as well, so we can hide or reveal the color. And that's really about it. So if I select this bottom fill at the moment, we look at the material symbols. So all patterns covers all of this. And then we can add custom collections, import custom patterns. So you'll find patterns online on the 3D warehouse, I think, as well. But just click on all patterns. It's the material symbols for now. So just open this up. And if you come down to earth compacted fill, with this selected, we'll just click on this. And it adds a pattern up here. Okay, there's no stroke because it's sitting behind the line. And then we can control this size and rotation here. Okay, this bar. So if I change the scale to maybe 0.5 or maybe 0.75, I can put my own scale in there as well and rotate it through 45 degrees, then that's not bad. So this is the same as this. So instead of going through that entire process again, we'll just use the style dropper, click on that, paste onto that. Job done. So let's look at this. This is our compacted gravel. So crushed rock gravel, we can use this one for that. So again, just click on that. That's in. Decide whether you fancy it being a little bit bigger or smaller, 0.75 maybe. Once again, it's the same pattern for this. But if we use the style dropper this time, it's going to give us that dark color. So we don't want that. We just want to select this. Then we click on crushed rock, and we'll just drop it back down to 0.75. So that's that bit done. This is going to be the same as this one, so we can use the eyedropper for that. That's fine. This is concrete. Whoops. This is concrete. So if we come up to the cast in place concrete, then that'll go on there. Again, this is probably going to be slightly smaller. This and this are the same. So eyedropper onto that. Now sand, a little bit awkward because it's sitting underneath this. So if you can get hold of the sand, you might have to zoom in a bit because this line is coming up and over and down. So it's kind of accommodating this big space. So we'll click on the sand and then click on this sand. And that should be fine for that. Screed is going to be the same as sand. Just because it's got a different background color, it's going to look slightly different. And then these ones are going to be the CMU. Okay, so concrete masonry unit. And again, we'll drop this down to 0.5 maybe. And then we can use the eyedropper for these. This one we'll copy and paste onto this. However, this one, because we've copied and pasted onto that, this has got no edge. We want to make sure our stroke is turned back on. So now we've got this sorted out. Okay, so it's all adjustable. As soon as you've got these things selected, you can just play with them on this thing here. So finally, we're going to pick this line. The stroke is red because it's going to highlight our damp-proof membrane that's coming along, up, lapped over, and then down and wrapped over the top of that. We're going to dash the line. So we'll choose this dash. And if we had the scale at 0.5 maybe, that'll be fine. We might want it to be 2 point. If we have a larger point, then you'll probably want a larger or smaller, I beg your pardon, scale. So that you might think that's too thick. So feel free to adjust as you want, but make sure you select it first. Maybe come down to 1.5 points. And there you go. So within no time at all, we've pretty much made this look like it's meant to be there now. And as I said, if you didn't like the color, then with these things selected, just uncheck the fill for each of these, and you'll then get to the black on white. Easy as you like. Okay, so this is how we use the pattern fill and the shape style to just address all of these issues that we have. And hopefully you can see now the sort of line differences are coming through a bit clearer.